Port City. How is everybody doing this morning? My name is Lee, and this is Jennifer, and we are really excited that everyone is here this morning. Today we are excited that Taylor Swander is going to come out in a few minutes, and he's going to share just a little glimpse into the life of what's going on in Tsunami, one of our student ministries here. So we're excited that we just get to hear from him and just get to pray and think about our students and what God is doing in their life. And then our pastor Mike's going to be out, and he's going to bring week 3 of the series that we're in, No Ordinary Family. So we're excited for today. But before we do all that, we just want to take some time and sing together. So if you would you stand to your feet? Would you maybe sit down your coffee for the next 15 minutes so you can just take in a posture of praise and thanksgiving as we sing together? As we sing this first song, I just want to remind you of this verse in 1 John 3 that says, "How great is the love of the Father that he has lavished upon us, that he would call us the children of God." So we give thanks for that this morning, that we are his children, that we were forgiven and accepted. We just sing of his amazing love that we don't deserve, but he has called us his own. So let's sing this morning. From the darkness, I called your name, and into darkness, your mercy came. You called me out and lifted me up. How great is your love? You bore my weakness, you took my shame, buried my burdens in fields of grace. You called me out and lifted me up. How great is your love? From the heights, of heaven, you stepped down to earth, innocent perfection, and gave your life for us. We are amazed, we stand in awe, for we have been changed by the power of the cross. How great is your love? How great is your love? How great is your love for us? That in your kindness you lead me home, in your presence where I belong. You call me out and lifted me up. And how great is your love? From the heights of heaven, you stepped down to earth, innocent perfection, gave your life for us. We are amazed, we stand in awe, for we have been changed by the power of the cross. How great is your love? How great is your love? How great is your love for And there has never been, there will never be a God like you, a love so true. There has never been, and there will never be a God like you, a love so grace when the heart is under fire. Another way when the walls are closing in. And when I look at the space between where I used to be and this reckoning, I know I will never be alone. There was another in the fire, standing next to me. There was another in the waters, holding back the seas. Should I ever need reminding of how I've been set free, there is a cross that bears the burden. Another died for me. There is another in the fire. All my debt left for dead beneath the waters. I'm no longer a slave to my sin anymore. Should I fall in the space between what remains of me and this reckoning? Either way, I won't bow to the things of this world. And I know I will never be alone. There is another in the fire, standing next to me. There is another in the waters, holding back the seas. Should I ever need reminding what power set me free? There is a grave that holds nobody, and now that power lives in me. There is another in the fire. Oh, 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 I can see, and I can see the light in the darkness as the darkness bows to Him. I can hear the roar in the heavens as the space between resting. I can feel the ground shake beneath us as the prison walls cave in. 'Cause nothing stands between us, and nothing stands between. There is no other name but the name that is Jesus. He who was and still is and will be through it all. So come on, May, in the space between all the things unseen and His reckoning. I know I will never be alone. I know I will never be alone. There'll be another in the fire, standing next to me. There'll be another in the waters, holding back the seas. And should I ever need reminding how good you've been to me? joy come every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. I'll count the joy come every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be.
Come on, church, let's celebrate that in this place today. Let's go. That's good. That is so good. I feel like somebody in this room right now needs to be reminded that no matter where you go, no matter where you find yourself, no matter how dark the day seems, Jesus is standing right here beside you, and he's not going anywhere, church. He's with us this morning, and let's celebrate this together as a church. That's good. You can have a seat. Thank you for worshiping God in this place together. Our usher team, you guys can go ahead and come down front. 2 weeks ago, we started this new segment in our services called We the Church. Really a movement of us trying to make sure that we broaden the perspective of the church as to what God is doing through the life of the church. And as we started having conversations about this as a staff and just praying about this time together, I was reminded in Matthew 5, Matthew records this sermon that Jesus is giving through a couple different chapters, and he writes what Jesus said. Jesus says, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house." And that's our heart for the next couple minutes of what we're trying to do every week, is to take the light of God, the light of the movement of God, the light of all that God is doing in our church, and make it bright for this room to see, to take the bowl off of the light fixture as the analogy that Jesus used, to help bring the church into what God is doing, and for us to celebrate and to stand with all of the ministry and all of the love and all of the compassion that our church is coming underneath the kingdom of God with. So Taylor Swander is our middle school director. Taylor, you can come out. Taylor is a great friend of mine and an incredible leader on our staff, and he has led Tsunami in such a great direction, and he's seen so much of like a powerful movement of God over the past couple months and couple years. So share with your church what you've seen God doing.
Yeah, so I knew for a really, really long time that I wanted to work with students, especially middle school students. They're awesome, because why wouldn't you? They're fun and you get to hang out. But in that came along with that was this fear that students are actually at some point going to open up and like share real things that are happening in their lives, like hurt and pain and loss and addiction, and there's so much. And me, like growing up, I'm like, how am I gonna minister to them? How am I gonna connect with them? How am I gonna help them through this? Well, last year, our family ministry team had someone come and share with us, and they said you could judge a healthy student ministry by what students are willing to share. And to me, that was just so freeing, because it seemed like every week we had students sharing really, really hard things with us. And it showed me that like the season that we were in and what God was calling us to do was to help students when they're struggling, when they're hurting. Because I always thought that if my students are struggling in my ministry, it's a reflection on me as a leader in our ministry. But really it's a reflection of the brokenness and the hardship in our world. And that's why we exist. We exist to help them and walk with them and encourage them through that. And just a really cool example of that, we had 2 female small group leaders that were thinking last year about serving with a group of 6th grade girls and didn't think they could do it because they were too old and they couldn't relate and they couldn't connect to them. And they did. They had a hard year. They struggled and it was challenging for them. And this last month, we went to Carowinds with now this 7th grade group, and they went and they got to go with their girls and hang out with them the whole time. And they said ever since that trip, they've come back and their group is just connecting. They're together. That it feels like every week since then, another girl in their group is committing their life to Christ. And the girls are now praying together, like they're initiating it. And these leaders just get to step back and see what God is doing. And it's a testament to our church, like that we have been able to create safe spaces and events and environments and have leaders and volunteers with a vision that like you can come just as you are, and we can give you hope and encouragement and push you closer to Jesus and what he wants to do with you and what he created you for. So it's been really, really awesome.
That's incredible. Church, how good is that? How good is that? That's so strong, Taylor. God is no question moving in the community of middle schoolers. How many middle schoolers on average?
We have an average about 300 middle school students here on a Wednesday night, which
300.
If you haven't seen that, it's pretty incredible. And they come and we get to show them Jesus every week. It's really, really cool.
And those are really fun nights.
Maybe too fun.
Maybe
yes.
too fun. It is incredible. If you ever have a chance to check it out, it really is incredible. And what you guys do is heroes work. And God is using you to show his love and his compassion to this generation. Keep doing what you're doing. Your church is with you and is for you. That's good, church. Thank you, Taylor, for sharing that. Yes, church, let's celebrate that. Church, we're in week 3 of a series called No Ordinary Family. Mike's gonna be out here in a second, but before we do that, there's gonna be a verse on the screen from the book of John where Jesus begins to describe why it is that he came to the world.
Family. What are your thoughts when you hear this word? Dinners, birthday parties, graduations, and weddings? Do you think of love, intimacy, and laughter? Or do you think of pain, absence, and conflict? Whatever your thoughts are, family was God's idea. His desire is for you to join his vibrant and growing family. A family marked by sacrifice and acceptance, marked by diversity and unity, marked by an eternal significance. A family like that would be no ordinary family.
Good morning. Welcome, everyone. We're glad you guys are here. I want to, today as we're continuing our series called No Ordinary Family, I want to really turn our attention and talk about this idea of what it means to belong to something. As we think about, especially in our context, a lot of people across 4 campuses, across a lot of geographical area, and what does that mean for us to belong? Have you ever remembered a time, or perhaps if you remember a time when you wanted desperately to belong but weren't sure if you could or would belong? And like, for me, I have to go back to middle school. A lot of my life was spent like this, but middle school particularly, I was very small and often kind of overlooked. Y'all can start feeling sorry for me now. And but I remember always trying to fit in, always trying to figure out how I'd find my place or connect or be a part of something. I was involved in youth group and all kinds of things like that. But one of the things that was, I remember very vividly when I was in the 7th grade, I was in 6th grade PE, sixth period PE. And 6th period was the athletes PE. Somehow I got in that. So I was like, we used to play bombardment. This is back in the days when you could like pelt each other with stuff. You can't do it anymore. But bombardment was like dodgeball with like all kinds of other rules. And so I'm like this scrawny 7th grade kid. And we had 7th through 9th grade. This was junior high. So I was this scrawny 7th grade kid with all these 9th grade football players. And it was basically like a minnow and the Sharks just killed me the whole time. So it was just like embarrassing everything. I got hit in the face, pinned against the bleachers. Everybody's like, get Ashcraft. And that was it. But they all wore these sweatshirts. Now, this is back in the day before you had, every kid was like a professional athlete in 7th grade. This is like when you had to, use the baseball bats that the team had. You didn't have your own helmets. You didn't have all that stuff. But when you were an athlete at North Clayton Junior High, you got a sweatshirt. And we were kind of modeled. Our uniforms looked like the Clemson Tigers, for those of you Clemson fans in here. And so they were this kind of blue and this big orange tiger paw. And man, I remember seeing those going, I want one of those so bad. I think I told you on my tried for football when I was in 7th grade. The coach told me I was too small, so I quit, tenacious like that. And so I remembered hearing when I was in the 9th grade. I was in 9th grade. I'd spent 2 years in middle school, 2.5 years in middle school, and never gotten to wear one of those sweatshirts, actually sweatpants too, with the big tiger paw on it. And I heard that they didn't cut on the swim team. So if you tried out for swimming, you wouldn't get cut. So I used to tell people, I said, I swam in middle school and high school, not because I was good, because you couldn't get cut. So I tried out, I made the team, and I got one of those sweatshirts. I got one of those sweatshirts. So yeah, y'all can clap for that, that's good. So I remember putting that on and just feeling like, man, I belong to something. And I would kill myself swimming. I was like good for like a middle of the pack all the time, but I didn't care because I was a part of this thing. And what I want to kind of remind, and what happens to us, I think part of our own challenges is that we all come in different places. As we get to be adults, we really learn how to create our own sense of autonomy and self-sufficiency, where we create our lives so that we really don't have to depend on anyone else, so that our belonging really becomes a matter of convenience and a matter of preference. We will belong to this group if we happen to like it, if we happen to think this, if we happen to agree with it, if we happen to believe the same, whatever it might be. But we don't really need it because we can sort of exist on our own. And so we don't really have this. And so when we think about the church and what we're supposed to become, I think there's something more to this that all of us need to explore. I want to talk about this very practically today. If you have your Bible, even on your app or your paper Bible, your old school paper Bible, I'm going to look at one of the statements that Jesus makes in Matthew chapter 10, and then mainly I want to look in Micah chapter 7. We're going to see this whole picture. So there's a couple things that we're going to say here, a couple of these really hard things that Jesus talked about. My premise in this is that the family is something more than what we have often thought it to be. The family is a seed that becomes something else. As much as I love my family, it's a seed that becomes something else. As proud as I am of my family, it's a seed that becomes something else. We've got to start understanding what this thing is, what it is for us to be, because of what's at stake, I think, in the world around us. This is what I want to sort of get vision for as we kind of move into the end of this year and into next year, and what it is that God's calling for us. I believe that the family exists to create or to provide a picture for some things that our culture is desperate for, in fact, that are foundational for us to continue with any sense of sanity, which is probably already gone, but you get the idea. My premise has been that the erosion of authority is a result of undermining the family. When the family structure sort of collapsed, it's collapsed, that authority goes by the wayside. So we're not trying to fight for like this restoration of the ideal family. We're trying to understand how it is that we represent this family of God in this world in a particular way, mainly for the redemption of a couple of things, namely authority and number 2, belonging. The erosion of belonging is a result of undermining our identity, and then the erosion of both authority and belonging leaves us no foundation for the future. There just is nothing to build upon. So what we get to do is we get to reestablish some things that allow a new way of thinking and interacting and being to sort of play itself out in the world around us. So I've been talking about all of this. I'm not sure this is going to be, again, the early service. I may change this up. But I've been establishing or trying to think about, and I do believe this is the single most important thing that we have to consider, is who is it that gets to be in charge? Who is it that gets to define us? Who has the right to tell us what to do? Who is it that that guides or governs your thoughts, your attitudes, your actions, your desires, your wants, all these things? And this is language that we all are familiar with, not only through the Bible, but almost everywhere. There's this idea that says that nothing should have to limit us in certain things, whether it's our self-expression or our opportunities or whatever it is. And we create political systems and such that move in both to the right and to the left in those ways. And what we lose out on is this fact that we are fundamentally trying to preserve for ourselves an individual way of life built on individual rights, and it is not sustainable. Do I think that individual rights are important? Of course I do. Of course I do. Only to the degree that they preserve and push us to live together. What happens, you're gonna see this 1,000 years ago, or actually 3,000 years ago. Same exact problems, different symptoms. And so I want us to see how this whole thing works to understand this. And then how this plays into our identity, or what this means for our identity. And then we'll see what happens between these two and how that affects belonging. That's what we're gonna do today. So here's what we've said. Today I wanna talk about what it is to be a part of the family. By way of review, we've said a couple things. Here's number one. The first thing we said is that God created a family in order to establish a people. As much as I want to believe that God created my family so that I could be healthy and wealthy and wise and have some nice kids and some nice grandkids, listen, I'm all for that. That's what I want. I want to move to an island and have just my kids and my grandkids around me, right? That's how I see my end. That's it. I'm not sure that's what God's doing. He created a family in order to establish a people. We got to understand what that means. The second thing we've talked about, we're gonna start exploring this a bit more today, is that if our family of origin can leave deep wounds, if what happened to you growing up, whether it was abandonment or abuse or neglect or having to prove yourself or whatever it might be in your situation, if it left you with deep wounds, then what we're hoping for, what we believe, what we're asking God for is that this family of redemption can bring deep healing. This only happens when you and I learn how to belong, to actually belong. And we're gonna kind of conclude with that today. That's what I hope you'll get by the end of this talk, is what is it that I need to belong. So the third thing, last week we talked about this, was that your ultimate identity will demand your ultimate allegiance. I'm gonna explain that in just a minute. The vision that I've been kind of wrestling with as I think about this topic, and again, this is fighting against my own way of thinking about things. Typically when I have talked about the family or taught on the family, Ephesians 5 and Deuteronomy 6, what I've always done is just driven it to this tactical way of thinking about the family. How is it that I'm supposed to act as a husband? How is it that she's supposed to act as a wife? Or you're supposed to act as a husband, she's supposed to act as a wife? How is it that we raise kids who understand what it means to know God? How is it that what's the tactical part of this? And I've never kind of gotten it above to think about what the implications, what happens to that seed when it is full grown? I've just not considered that very often. And in fact, if I'm really honest, when I think about the church as a family, it's a little overwhelming. I remember growing up, we used to close every service with, "I'm so glad I'm a part of the family of God." I'm looking across going, "You're a knucklehead, and so are you." And you're like, I don't want to be known by these people. And think about us, we got people like all over the place that represent like who we are. We're a part of this thing. And it's easy to go, I don't want to be known by their mess. I got enough mess of my own. And so all of a sudden, people say, "Mike, I know some people who go to your church." I'm like, well, look, there's no telling. I know people who go to our church, right? And somehow there's this thing. And if we're really honest, we don't like together, and maybe I'm the only one, but we don't like together because then we bear kind of responsibility for other people's behavior. We're judged by what they say or think or do. And I would rather not have it happen. And what I'm suggesting perhaps we ought to do is, we can't control all of that, but what we can start to do is to go, what is it we're going to do? What is it we're going to do? We can't control what anybody else does, but we can start to say, this is what we are gonna do, and to belong to that thing that says we're gonna do something about this, and this is why. Because what happens is when we become this, I believe this is what happens in the world. When we become this, we become a family that brings healing to the wounded identities that so many people suffer from and struggle with. That somehow what happens is when you belong, when you interact and become, it brings healing to your wounded identities. And what happens when we actually become that kind of family, we become a people. We become a people through whom the world gets redeemed and blessed. Think about this. What if that were actually what God intended for the family to become, the seed that the family is to become a people? That if we became, I think we're gonna go through this. I think we have those up there maybe. We become a family that brings healing to our wounded identity. And then the second part of that is we become a people through whom the world is blessed and redeemed. Think about if that happened to us. Think about if that was and the reality is I've seen this become people's stories. It's pronounced when people struggle with addictions and other types of, it's like somehow they find healing and hope and they immediately share that with other people. The rest of us, we get healing and hope and we build sort of our own kingdom, but the reality is we're all in the same boat. This is what God has intended for us to be and to become. The family is a unifying way. It's a system, and that's how he designed it. It's a system by which we live as his people, under his authority and for his glory. And if you can sort of get this in your mind, then we'll be able to figure out how all of this sort of works together. So I'm gonna read Jesus' statement. This is one of his most shocking statements found in Matthew chapter 10. We're gonna talk about this. And what I wanna do today too, some of you who you read the Bible a lot and you're good at it, and I was good at it for a long time. And what I would do is I'd read the Bible and I would look for principles to apply to my life. I underline, ooh, that's so good. Got me a nugget, I can tweet it out. Put a picture of my coffee and my Instagram, and what a great godly quiet time. God gave me this nugget today. I can apply it to my life. And we read it like that. And then what you do is you sort of overlay that on everything else. I want to kind of show you. Some of you stop reading the Bible because you read things in there that are weird. And you go, I don't even agree with that. And it bothers you. And to be honest, some of the things that we read in the Bible ought to bother us. And so I want to kind of show you how to read the Bible and interact with it in a way that we actually understand what Jesus is trying to do as he reorients us and establishes his rule. Jesus came to bring his kingdom. He came to bring his kingdom to bear. He came to assemble a people, to redeem a people that would belong to God, that would be redeemed, restored to the Father. This is why this relationship is so important, right? We would keep hammering this over and over and over and over and over again. Jesus, the gospel is not about you getting into heaven. The gospel is about you being reconciled into a relationship with the Father. That is so important for us to understand. You don't want to go to heaven to live in a relationship with someone that you don't even know or care about. That would not be heaven. You ever ended up with dinner with someone you can't stand? This is nothing like heaven. Because if the relationship isn't there, being where that person is not gonna help you any at all. Jesus came to restore us into a relationship for which we have been made, the one that stands to redeem every other wound that has happened to us. That's what this is about, okay? This is why this is so important to me. Well, man, what's wrong with Mike? Well, this is what's wrong with Mike. So and this is how Jesus taught. It used to bother me so bad because I'm like, Jesus seems to go against what I think the family ought to be. So here's what he says, Matthew chapter 10, verse 34. This is Jesus talking to his disciples. Do not suppose that I've come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. Anybody underline that one in your Bible? I can tell you why you would. If you're really mad at someone and you need a little judgment, say, hey, Jesus didn't come to bring peace, man. He came to bring a sword. That's what I'm here to do. Just act like Jesus. Swack. So what in the world does he mean? What is he saying? We know that Jesus said, peace I give you. So is Jesus like, is there a problem? Like what's wrong with him? Or what is he saying? What he says when you read these verses like this, you start piecing together, like, what is Jesus saying? He says, my peace I give you. What's the next line? Not peace like the world gives. There's always this sort of thing happening around when he's talking. People say, I love Jesus. He was just clear. Yep. Crystal. I do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. What I think is really interesting here is that there's this idea that there's a peace that is the way in which we think, that he is coming to actually cleave that. He's coming to put an end to that. He's coming to go, this is not the kind of peace. Do not think that I've come to preserve the status quo. And he's gonna reach back and draw on some things in just a minute. I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. It's interesting that a Hebrew person would understand the dividing of things as the way in which God created. He separated the waters from the sky, waters above, the waters below. He separated the waters and the earth emerged. Separation was a way in which creation and redemption happened. So he comes to bring a sword. Why? To say there's a rule that needs to be severed in order for something else to emerge, for redemption to happen. This is the picture that would have been in their heads. So then he reaches back and he quotes from Micah chapter 7 in the Old Testament. Jesus is getting deep. Here's what he says, for I have come to turn, and then he quotes, this is direct from Micah chapter 7, verse 6, to turn a man against his father and a daughter against her mother and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. So that's not so hard to do. And a man's enemies will be members of his own household. Don't we all feel good now? For I have come to turn a man against his father and his daughter against her mother and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's enemies will be in his own household. What we think is that Jesus used the Bible the way we would use the Bible. Here's my point. Here's a verse to prove my point. That's not at all how Jesus was using the Bible. That's not at all how any rabbi in the first century would use the Old Testament scriptures. What he was doing is he was putting a picture in their head. They would see something and understand something. When you begin to read it and you understand what's happening in Micah chapter 7, what you realize is this is a time of great confusion in the culture. When he was quoting this, that he says that a man will turn against his father, a daughter against her mother, he was saying there's gonna be chaos. He's reaching back to a time of confusion. They would have understood and known what this was. There was occupation and there was political chaos and there was all sorts of fear and anxiety about who was gonna be in charge and how this was gonna turn out, all kinds of corruption. There were corrupt leaders who were leveraging the systems, using the priest to both preserve their power and to protect their power. Does that sound familiar to anybody? And it's confusing. You can't tell what you can believe about what anybody is saying. It's confusing. This is what he's reaching back to. And then he's saying this, he says that all of a sudden, the best of them is like a briar. In other words, the best of them is prickly, but the worst of them will absolutely keep you at bay. There's this separation of people, this sense of autonomy. Then he says, and all of a sudden the day that God visits has come, and now is a time of confusion. Don't trust your neighbor, don't trust this. A man against his father, a daughter against her mother, is gonna be utter chaos. Think about this. When you were young, I know this hadn't happened in a long time to some of you, but when you were young and you were with your friends and you were doing something you know you shouldn't be doing. So it's gotta be a long time ago for a lot of us, right? A long time ago, because we don't do that anymore. But you're doing something that you know you shouldn't be doing, and you're with your friends, and you're all together, you're like, dude, this is gonna be awesome, and you're getting all of a sudden one of their parents walk in the room. You're like, it is every man for himself. Right, you know this. Some of you do this in your own homes, right? As soon as you come in and your brothers and sisters or even husbands, it's her, it's she, you're immediately, you're like, every man for himself. In times of confusion and chaos, when everybody's trying to protect their authority, their power, it's every man for himself. And what he is saying is the most intimate of relationships cannot withstand autonomy. They can't. What Jesus has come to do, and this is why you have to start thinking about this. Jesus has come to establish a rule a kingdom. If you keep this in mind, it will change the way you think about this, if you keep this in mind. The next thing he talks about now, he all of a sudden shifts this. So he's giving them this picture, and now he's talking about love. Anyone who loves their father or their mother more than me is not worthy of me, and anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Now, some of you have got that down better than others, and that's probably the wrong application, but we're going to talk about that in just a minute too. Anyone who does not love me. I've been thinking about this and trying to understand this because, again, what Jesus has come to do, if we've been talking about the kingdom, and we say that the kingdom is a way of life under, I'm gonna put this right there, under the rule of love. It's really interesting that Jesus switches gears. He's talking about this chaos that's emerging, and then he says, anyone who does not love or loves their son or their daughter or their husband or their wife or their mom more than me is not worthy of me. And you have to start going, what in the world does that mean? I've seen people draw all kinds of things like scale, and they go, okay, so it's like God's here, and then your kid's down there, your husband or your wife's down there, and there's this big giant gap. And that's sort of how we do this. And this gives us a picture in our head that I'm not sure we know what to even do with this. So I began to think about this. How does Jesus talk about this? This is so important for us to understand. At least so important for us to begin to understand. Whenever you hear the great command, right? When Jesus was talking about this, a new command I give you, to love others as I have loved you, to love one another as I have loved you. This is his message. And when he's asked, what's the greatest law in all of the law and the prophets? He tells them, this is in Matthew 22, it's known as the great command in Christian circles. He says to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. I don't know, at least the way I think of this, I don't think he's going, first love God and then everybody else. This is what's first. This is the first thing, and then so you should just spend all of your time in quiet time in prayer. Don't talk to your kids, don't talk to your wife, don't do all this stuff. And then if you have some time left over after that allegiance, then you can do this. That's how a lot of us, this is how it's taught. I don't think that's what he's saying. I think that this is source, not order. Now I want you to think about this. What we are saying is that there is an authority structure, something that governs. When it is autonomy, when it is you and your way, you don't need anyone else to govern or shape because you are in charge and you get to say who you are and how you are and all of those things. If we give that rule to another, all of a sudden what we're saying is there's a new source of authority, a new source of life, a new source under which we live, and it is now governed by love. It's not distance, it's not order, it's source. Here's why. What I believe is that whatever your first love is will be the source of all other loves. You got to think about this. Here's why this matters. Because for some of you, what's happened to you is the source of your first love is something that you don't have. It's a marriage that broke up or a marriage that you don't have. It's kids that didn't turn out the way that you wish they would have, or kids that you don't have. There's something about it, so you're pressing, and everything gets shaped by this. Because the source of every other love is hinged on the fact that you haven't gotten or don't have what it is that you thought you should have or could have. For some of you, it's more based than that, right? It's you thought you'd be better financially. You thought you'd be better this. You thought this would happen more. You thought your life would be different. And because you're pursuing that your first love is to make a name for yourself, to show somebody, to show your mom or your dad that they would be proud of you and you're working. It becomes the source of everything else. Does that make sense? It drives and frames every other conversation, every prayer, every complaint. For some of you, this is the reason you no longer want to walk with God. And what he says is, if anyone puts these other things in place of me, they are not a sufficient source for you to live the way you've been intended to live. Jesus has come to establish a kingdom, and life in his kingdom changes everything. Why? Because life in his kingdom actually frames your identity as one who belongs to God in a reconciled relationship with the Father and therefore connected to each other, like it or not. That's what we're reframed as. That's what being governed by love looks like. Here's the beauty of this. It means that, because what happens is when we begin to understand that we have been loved by God, and therefore the only thing we have to do is to give that to someone else. It becomes much easier. It's never someone else's worth or their value that determines how I treat them or respond to them or give to them or offer to them or extend to them. It is simply the way I have been loved by God. This is what Jesus said, the great commandment, right? You love one another as I have loved you. This actually one-ups the golden rule, in case you're playing along. The golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This is no, you do unto others as Jesus has done to you. That's a much different thing. I don't often want to treat other people the way Jesus has treated me, if you're following. But what this means, this is how we come underneath the rule and reign, this way of life under the rule of his love. It means that my marriage now serves a purpose. It is not the source of my purpose. It means that your singleness serves his purpose. It's not the source of his purpose, nor are you lost with purpose because you don't have a husband or a wife. It means that your parenting serves a purpose. It means that not having children serves a purpose. It means not getting what you want when you want it now has meaning and power and potential because God's simply trying to restore the rule of his love, the authority of life here on earth under the rule of his love, and therein our belonging to that. That's what he's doing. So how is it that this redemption of belonging happens? What happens here? Let's apply this. This is how it's talked about or taught throughout the New Testament in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And this is what Paul writes, and you can find this in Romans chapter 12 when he says to rejoice with those who rejoice, to weep with those who weep. This is how he says it here in verse 24 of chapter 12, the book of 1 Corinthians. But God has put together the body, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for one another. That we should learn how to have equal concern for one another. That we should learn how to do this. He goes on, he says this in verse 26, if one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, then every part rejoices with it. Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it. Being a part of it doesn't mean that you have a card and it gets you into places. It means that you have responsibility. It means that there's something to go along with this. And here's where this gets really practical. So I want to talk, what does it mean to belong? When I put on that shirt, it wasn't just to walk around and go, I'm on the swim team. I swam the 500 free. That was the long race in the thing. The fastest times were like, this is back in the day, so they're faster than this now. They were like in the low fours. High 3-minute, low 4s. I was like in the 5.5 minute. So that means like the winner's gotten out, taking a shower, hanging out, and I'm still in the pool. Yeah. I didn't care because my job was to finish. I was a part of that team. It meant I give everything I can every time. The shirt wasn't just, sort of eye candy. It wasn't just to go, look, I'm on the team. It meant something from me. We've lost this in our culture. To belong. To belong means to contribute, to bring yourself. To bring something to this. And then there's a million ways to do this. But I want to get even more kind of practical. Do you know what it means to suffer with someone? Like all of you have done it. Some of you are doing it now. To sit in the hospital room with someone who is fighting cancer, perhaps towards the end of their life, and to just struggle and suffer with them, to enter into it with them. not with sympathy or pity, but with boldness and confidence and saying, we are in this, we're gonna shoulder this, we're gonna pray, we're gonna ask, we're gonna walk through this. I'm not gonna leave you to suffer with someone. Do you know what it's like to rejoice with someone? Suffering with people oftentimes is easier for me than rejoicing with people, because when people get more accolades than me, you're like, dude, I'm better than them. You ever done that one? To rejoice when someone else succeeds, to go, that's a great thing. We live with chronic envy in our culture, right? Because that's what we do. It's just like, wow, their life is so cool. And my life, I'm gonna post some pictures that make my life look just as cool as their life. To rejoice, to belong, to belong. So all of you probably have some picture in your head of what that looks like for you to suffer with or to rejoice with. And maybe what you should do is to pull out your phone, not right now, I guess you could if you want, but to pull out your phone and to text someone and tell them you're there for them, or to tell them you're proud of them. I've started doing this, especially with guys who are younger than me. I'm 49 years old, I'm too young. I always thought grandpas, like, 70s and 80s, was, I'm really proud of you, son. But at 49, I start saying that to almost anybody who's younger than me. Do you know why? Because there are so many young men in our culture who've never heard that from a grown man. Not to go, you're cool, you're hip, or I like you. To go, I'm really proud of the way you did this. To rejoice with someone. Maybe that's what you need to do. Maybe it's a text you need to send out to someone. Maybe it's a card, a note, a thank you note. Maybe it's something you just, whatever it is. I've just started now when I pray for someone, I don't care, because you look at it and go, man, I haven't texted him in like 8 months. I don't care, I'm just gonna text him, praying for you, thinking about you. Is there anything I can do? Because it's just a way to rejoice. We belong to each other. We are created to be a family, and it's a seed. It's a seed of what we're to become as we become a people. A blessing to the world, a force for redemption. This is what we must become. And the redemption of authority is found. It rests in your relationship with Christ, and it rests in my relationship with Christ. We will only be as strong. We will only become a people to the degree that you and I live underneath his rule. That's just the way it's gonna be. The way it gets redeemed is the more I surrender and submit my life to his rule, the more you surrender and submit your life to him, the more we do that together, the more we are going to work towards the redemption of this thing. We're gonna live under this different rule, and that's the redemption of authority. But the redemption of a belonging takes something much different. The redemption of belonging believes or begins with receiving. So let me flip the script. Have you ever had someone suffer with you? And don't scale your suffering, right? Some of you, it was a breakup, it was a hard time, something your kids are going through, something you were going through, was trying to figure out what major you are in college. It might be anything. Have you ever had someone just enter in and walk with you through something that was hard? Think about that. For a lot of people, you know what their response is? They say thank you, but what often it is it's guilt masks as gratitude. Because when someone helps them or suffers with them or enters in and helps them, they usually, in some of the deepest parts, don't feel like they're worthy of that help. You ever know anybody that feels like this? No, you do whatever you can for them, and they still don't. Some of you live in marriages like this because you've made a mistake in a marriage and you feel like you're not worthy of this person's love for you anymore. So every time they do something for you, you say thank you, but it's just gratitude. It's just guilt masked as gratitude, because when you say thank you, what you're actually saying is thank you, I don't deserve this. Belonging begins when you learn how to receive. You know what the beauty of this model is? That your mistake is not the source of my love. Your worth, your goodness, your issue is not the source of my love. Jesus told me, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. It's not order, it's source. If I am loved by God, if I live in that relationship, I am free to avail myself to you. You know what the call is? You know what the challenge is? for you to simply receive that as love. You know what love does? Love breathes worth and value into your soul. And when you receive that, not to believe it first, how can this be? We don't know. How can this be? To receive it, to trust that someone has simply availed themselves to you because they are loved by God and you are loved by God, and they are just breathing that into you to receive that. And then guess what begins to happen? You start to believe it. You start to go, oh wow, this is who I really am, and this is where I really belong. What I want for all of us to test ourselves in, I have 9 seconds left. I want you to think about someone who has struggled with you, who was with you, who helped you, who stood by you. Some of them you pushed away a long time ago, but you knew and know they're still there. Perhaps what you need to do is to send them a note or get them for coffee and just say thank you. But don't just say thank you. Don't just say thank you. You need to actually say, I receive what you have done for me as love. And what you're saying is, I'm allowing that to breathe worth and value into my life that I don't deserve, but the beauty of it is your deserving is not the source of it anyway. If you don't love Christ first, all these other things are gonna run dry. I started doing this as language that I've started using. People say, Mike, this was really good. I appreciate y'all doing this. And I'll say, thank you, but let me give, and I just started saying, I'm gonna receive that. I just use that. It's weird. People are like, what do you mean? Because I know what it means for me. I'm gonna receive that. I'm gonna take that in. I'm gonna let that speak to me and let that mean something to me. Do you know why? Because belonging begins with receiving. When you receive what we do for one another, you become a part of what God is doing as he creates a family to establish a people. You begin to experience healing of your deep wounds, and we become a force for redemption in the world around us. Let's pray. Father, thank you. I ask that you would just call to mind people in our lives who've done that for us. And God, not just to stop with thank you, but to actually receive it into our being, to declare that, to verbalize that, to receive it. And then we ask, God, that you would just use our availing of ourselves to well up belief and trust in ways that may have been deeply wounded because of experiences we've had here in this world. God, we ask you to restore the rule of your love. And God, to do it it's not gonna happen in politics, it's not gonna happen in our government, but God, do it in your church. And when you do that in your church, Father, it will come to bear on the world. We lift this in the name of your Son, Jesus, who is our King. Amen.